timely, insightful, discussion and analysis of economic trends and markets. From Southern California to Sacramento, featuring business and political leaders, unique field reports. From Orange County and the campus of Chapman University, this is the Chapman Business Report.
And welcome back to the Chapman Business Report. Special show as we come to you from the Segerstrom Performing Arts Center on the cusp of the 34th annual Chapman Economic Forecast. The man who created it to my left, Dr. Jim Doty, president of Chapman University, longtime economist, a disciple back in the day, University of Chicago, of Milton Friedman, which brings us to 2011 and this 34th annual economic forecast. And his disciple was Essie Adibi, teaching assistant back then, and 34 years they've been putting on the forecast and a revision in the summer.
I'm Friedman's son, he's his grandson.
We talked in a prior show about kind of general tenor of the forecast, which, Jim, again, sum it up. What are we looking for, just generally speaking, nationally in 2012?
Yeah, weak growth. The only positive real engines of growth will be a slight improvement in business investment, and consumer spending should stay relatively healthy, but that translates to about 2.2% growth, higher than this year's, but just marginally so.
But the consumer has rebalanced, right, boss? I saw that the consumer, only 3% of consumers are more than a month behind on their credit cards, so they're loaded up again.
Yeah, but if you look at the trend has improved. You know, first the savings rate went up to about 6% nationally, and then people have started a little bit of spending. You know, the pent-up demand is kicking in. Saving rates is down to 3%, but it's very sad that we really want consumer to spend. Because without consumer spending, or at least decent consumer spending, we're not going to get that 2.2, 2.3% growth at the national level.
Yeah, so consumer spending and investment would be okay, but the problems are exports, which up to now in this recovery comprise 1/2 of all positive gain came from exports, but because of problems in Europe, even in China, their current account is shrinking. Global trade will be reduced, so we see subpar performance in terms of export activity. And then you still have the continuation of this housing depression, not recession, housing depression. And we don't see anything happening there to improve it significantly this next year.
Other things, what do you see for the dollar? What do you see for inflation, oil prices?
The dollar is anyone's guess. I don't know if you ever. It's like we're trying to forecast the stock market, but long term, I see weakness in the euro, relatively greater strength compared to the euro, at least for the next couple of years. Euro should be under some pressure.
And oil prices?
Oil prices are extremely important for us. You know,
and as we sit here again heading toward 100.
Heading the 100, but people are making one big mistake because we're looking at West Texas, which is at 100. But if you look at the Brent, which was 125, is down to 107. That's why you're seeing gasoline prices going down. Hopefully, we want the gap to get narrowed and go down. And basically, it should. I mean, fundamentally, with this type of growth rate, we should have much lower oil prices. The problem is what's coming from Iran and the uncertainty. Some of it is political that is hurting us. And that is important because gas prices, we have noticed, is extremely important in consumer spending decision.
You know, a big risk in all this is the dollar. I'm glad you brought it up, the U.S. dollar and the value. We think it'll be okay, but a potential concern we have is this narrowing or shrinking of the Chinese current account. They use that current account basically to buy our debt. And if they decide because they need to invest more internally and not just go back and buy U.S. bonds, government bonds, and they stop that, that will really put downward pressure on the dollar. But on the upside, it'll help exports. Right, exactly.
This coordinated action by all the central banks, and again, we record this at the beginning of December, was that just a short-term thing, or is this something, I mean, it boosted the financial markets unbelievably on the few days once the news broke. Is that something that longer term?
Oh, I think that's part, and it's one of the Band-Aids that's being used, and there's enough of these Band-Aids that will save the euro and the European Union. But that's one of a number of things that will require fiscal constraint, giving up some sovereignty. Certainly, and the reason I said the euro will be under downward pressure is there's going to have to be greater action from the European Central Bank. And what will it be? Basically, buying back these bonds, no one else wants Italian bonds, Greek bonds, Spanish bonds, Irish bonds, Portuguese bonds. So who's going to buy them? They're going to give a greater ability to the European Central Bank to do that. Up to now, they haven't been allowed to. But we think one of the band-aids will be to give them the wherewithal to do that. But that creates down the road inflation, and inflation will undermine the value of the euro in international exchange markets.
Your forecast is based on numbers. I know on surveys too, boss, but does it factor in something we talked about a couple of weeks ago, and I'd like to hear, Jim, your thoughts, that there is this growing voice out there. There's been several books written. That Used to Be Us. I think that's Thomas Friedman. There's books about that we have lost, and it's a global slowdown, I know, but here in the U.S. we've kind of lost our economic mojo, become a big cliche. Are you part of that camp?
No. In fact, everybody's looking at China as the big miracle.
India.
Listen, I'm old enough to know that we were saying that about Japan in the late 1900s, 1970s, 80s. Japan's going to surpass the U.S., and it's been an economic wreck the last 20 years. China, with all of the positive buzz and spin you have about China, in fact, a recent article in the Wall Street Journal that we should follow its economic model, it's going to be facing dramatic downward growth in its population, a downtrend in its population growth as a result of its one child only. And through 2050, its population is actually going to decline 15%. Now, it's very large, but it's going to decline 15%, while ours, over this century, 2000 to 2050, will go up 30%.
And I've been to enough of your forecast to know that that is always a key component of growth is population growth.
Long run. So long run, for short run, going out to our forecast now, 2012, it's things like government policy, fiscal, monetary policy, trends in consumer spending. But when you go long run, look at demographics, and that's where the U.S. looks pretty good because we have a relatively strong natural birth rate, unlike Europe where it's declining, and in China, but we also allow immigration. That, I think, the one very positive move that the government can make is make it easier for immigrants to enter the country and also issue visas.
I'd like to echo a little opposite view here. Not that
Who invited him?
Not that I disagree with Jim. I mean,
presentation.
absolutely, population is important, and we have the advantage. But what makes me worried, that should not give us a false comfort. We have a significant problem here. I mean, our public education system is not doing well. Going back to immigration, why do we want to loose up on immigration? Because we need high value-added workers. We need highly educated people, and unfortunately, those are foreign-born. So we do have some fundamental problem that we have to address. Dependency on government, lack of responsibility, regulation, lack of good public education system. I named those. So although Jim is correct that I don't think China is going to be as big of a gorilla that everybody is saying, we have to be careful not to get too comfortable because there are countries out there that the population, the working class, is much more hungrier. And they're highly educated, and they work hard, and they're responsible, and they will compete with us. And they can compete with us.
Exactly.
So
we made it through the first show without talking about Healthcare Act, which is going to go before the U.S. Supreme Court next year. Did that weigh into your forecast? This has added up, 30 more million people will be added to, if it's upheld by the Supreme Court, added to the rolls, but there'll be greater. We think there's going to be greater costs and taxes. Was that a big factor?
Actually, I'm going to let Essie deal with that because he spends all of his day at Chapman checking his insurance, complaining about Chapman's health insurance policy. He knows every in and out of that
insurance stocks in the run-up to the vote.
I don't even know anything about it.
Well, of course, as I'm getting older, there's more pain, so I have to check everything.
But he loves analyzing this.
No, I mean, most of the provisions are not going to kick in 2012, so that's not going to be basically a problem. I don't see it as too.
Is it holding business back, though?
I don't believe so. But some of the provisions are going to be costly. But one way or another, somebody has to pay for it. We have a serious problem. I mean, when we have people who do not have insurance, what do they end up to get the care? They would eventually become a public charge. That is, emergency room or state and counties are going to pay. There is a real problem with our healthcare delivery system. Now, whether Obamacare took care of the problem or not, but that's questionable, and everybody is debating. But at least the issue is being addressed, and we have to address it. Otherwise, again, cost of healthcare is going to increase. We have an aging population, and that's going to become a huge burden on individuals, on corporations that provide insurance for employees, and for the government sector.
If we,
let me give you my dream plan, really, because I have a dream
goes back to the
plan.
individual.
We just put it in at Chapman. I'm a part of it. It's a high deductible plan. You have a savings account. You put in your income tax-free into a savings account. You use your own money up to that point where you get that, let's say if it's some catastrophic illness, the insurance picks up. But up until, I don't know, $2,000, $3,000, you pay it out of this fund that you put your money into, your own money. That means you're going to be careful about spending. Now, there are people who can't afford that. That's where the government can then subsidize us to buy that same private insurance. Be a great plan.
It is much cheaper.
Jim Doty for president.
It makes perfect sense, because I ask everybody, what's the last time you looked at your medical bill? Nobody does.
Nobody
Somebody
does.
else is paying
it's
for
not
it.
a private. It's a socialistic. Everything. It's like post office.
Right.
Everybody's doing things faster these days. Computers, everything's faster. Technology, getting messages now like that. Who's the one agency in the whole country where they're now saying it's going to be slower? The U.S. postal system. Government-run bureaucracy that doesn't have an incentive to come up with better services and products for the
lack
customers.
Lack of adjustment to reality. Postal Service should have known a year ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago where the trend is. I mean, how many checks do you write now and mail them? Nothing. I don't write any. And they should have realized all of this, that the volume is going to go down, so the distribution centers, they don't need as many of them. They maybe have to reduce their workforce. Unfortunately, they respond, and that's a typical problem with government. It's always too late till it's crisis, and that's what we're seeing now.
And I look at that savings account. You put in, you get a balance and when you use it to spend it on a doctor or medicine or whatever, you pay attention. Nobody's paying attention now unless you have something like that. And when you pay attention, that's what a market system is all about. There'll be a better balance of supply and demand.
Let me jump in there, though, but that program is not going to be cheap, and it's not going to be really everybody can afford it. So still you need government somehow to help people.
But it would be
to
more
pay for the
efficient
premium,
use
it
of
would be more
resources.
efficient. Exactly.
Speaking of inefficient, we come to the state. You do a state forecast. We know the state is in as bad a shape, with the possible exception of maybe Nevada and Florida.
Moved up in the rating for business friendly. It went from 48th worst to the 44th worst. Yeah. So,
I'm surprised. What did we do? Because they see that we're now proposing an increase in the income tax or sales tax, but seriously, what do you see in the forecast for this state? And just your overall take from a pending $500 billion underfunded pension plan to our systemic deficit, problems in education.
well, if we actually implement this increase in the income tax, I can assure you we're going to go back from 44th to 50th, or it's going to go down, obviously, because California, people are moving out. Population dropped in California, unlike the
First
U.S.,
time
because of out-migration.
And they'll go to Texas, and
what's
they'll go
going to
to
happen? We're a footloose society, and people, they move to Texas, no income tax, so it's a short-run solution, but it creates incredible long-run problems. Increasing taxes is not the way to do it, because in a dynamic economy where you have open borders, high-tax people are going to leave, and they are the people who are investing that are creating jobs.
Sure, it goes before the voters. As first, I mean, again, it points up the problem with our initiative system, or do you support that? And then how do you think they'll go on this? Do you think the voters would
Actually, the
majority
governor, what he's proposing, what I've heard, is that the surcharge on income taxes, the increase, is not going to be for people over $1 million of income. It's going to hit at $250,000 of income. So it's going to really go down, to larger group. And then increasing sales tax. Remember, we see the car sales have gone up through the roof this just last couple of months. I mean, you lower the sales tax, people respond. I mean, when you increase sales tax, sure, people might still buy a car, but they take into account what the sales tax is and maybe buying a cheaper car than more expensive. It's going to slow down economic growth. Now, basically, this is a transfer payments, getting from a group of people to support the government. Can we introduce a little efficiency in the government system? And that's what really the puzzling factor is. Can we save money here and there? You don't hear these sort of things. You know, when it comes to, for example, retirement, are we coming with any meaningful changes, whether it's at the state, county, or city levels?
You have to really tackle the big things. And one of the big things in the state absorbing an increasing share of the budget is pensions. States are the only corporations have moved to a different system of funding pensions.
We're the only ones doing the
You define the
benefit.
contribution versus the state defined benefit. And now states are doing it. Rhode Island just adopted a defined benefit plan, and as a result, they're saving huge numbers in its relatively small budget. Same thing can happen in California.
I don't see the urgency, do you?
But if we had the political wherewithal, that's where we have to focus attention, because that's where you can save the big bucks. But it's got to happen. It's not going to happen piecemeal. It's not going to happen with income tax increases. We're just going to have problems down the road with the declining
That's
economy.
a Band-Aid to why are we running these deficits
Band-Aid.
that we need these tax
More
increases?
fundamental problem again. Let's assume these taxes go into effect. Let's say we get it. They say it's temporary. What's going to happen? First of all, they're not going to disappear. And secondly, the revenue as economy improves is going to grow, and the state is going to again overspend, and we're going to be back to the same problem. See, the problem we have to, and we urged it, I think Jim did it quite a bit when he was advising Governor Schwarzenegger, we need a cap on spending. Unfortunately, we know our government has a tendency of getting revenue during good times, change the base budget, change the retirement system, the benefits, and then once the cycle kicks in, we're all in trouble. We need some cap on spending, fundamental changes, address the retirement system, and really look at the tax code and maybe make significant revisions that enhances economic growth and in turn would generate more tax revenue. These are fundamental changes that we need to do.
But it can't just be a cap. In a way, we've had a forced cap because the economy has been so weak and revenues have been so low. But what's happening is some areas of the budget are absorbing other parts, one of which is pensions. And our public servants, they do a great job. They work hard, no question about that. But the pension plan, as it's currently defined,
It's not affordable.
you can't afford it. It's going to break the bank.
If we were, I would say, I mean, if it's part of if it's given to you, this for 90% of your last 5 years of pay, of course you will take it. But how do you undo it? How do we undo this system? And that
Rhode Island did.
Rhode Island did.
Well,
No, there are lots and lots of things that they can. There's something I just recently heard, airtime. You could pay so many years and buy additional years of service without even working. So there are a whole bunch of gimmicks here.
Increasing their retirement age so it gets closer to death. Where you don't have to pay
And your
anymore.
retirement
Italy did
pays.
that.
Yeah.
I mean, even Italy, of all countries, is adopting austerity measures because it's virtually
And again,
bankrupt.
They're going from
They're
44.
not going to be able to sell their bonds, just like California wouldn't be able to sell its bonds.
Jim, they're going from 45 years retirement age to 50. I'm kidding.
And from 3 months vacation to 2.5 months vacation. They live the good life.
So if the mojo has not been lost and you're encouraged that there's going to be population growth in the country, it has been lost somewhat. We're on the verge of killing the golden goose in the state.
When I moved from Chicago to this state, 1974, this was such a dynamic state, growth state. Jim Edwards was, in fact, Lowell Edwards had his medical plant in Oregon. But because of high taxes in Oregon to California, to Orange County, created Edwards Laboratories for heart valves. That became they created, because of the entrepreneurs there, developed Warren Hancock Laboratories, all kinds of other companies. We are the medical products capital of the world, largely because Lowell Edwards moved from Oregon to California. Edwards just recently announced an expansion, not in California, out of state. It's because of that 44 or 48 rating in business competitiveness. In a global economy, you will locate your businesses where it's cheapest, where it's most efficient. And it's increasingly not in California, as wonderful as the state is. So we need to take drastic action and make some tough decisions to create that kind of an environment that nurtures growth, nurtures job creation, because in the end, that's what ultimately leads to a strong economy.
More of a political question, but Governor Schwarzenegger tried that with his initiatives, I think, back in 2005, kind of tackling the 3 or 4 things from redistricting.
Very
Do you
sad.
think, and everybody runs scared now because they think the voters spoke
because
on
he
that.
made a mistake. You know, the
Should have
the
tried
state,
3.
exactly. You don't bring 3 of them. Reality is that public employee
4.
system is very powerful, and they have a very solid voice, and they want to protect their interests, which is understandable. So we have to really be reasonable and bring about changes slowly and gradually. But going back to what Jim said, never forget, this state has lots of positive things going for it. We have excellent labor force. We have beautiful educational system. We have entrepreneurs that are willing to take the risk.
And the weather ain't bad.
And the weather is not bad. So there are lots of things
We have a
working
state water
good for
project
us.
that needs fixing.
But for example, a simple
yeah.
thing they can do, they can change the labor laws. You know, like nobody can get, you know, you have to get overtime after 8 hours. I mean, I have couple of assistants in my office. They love to put 1 extra hour, but I have to watch for my overtime. So there's certain things that you're slowing down the growth, and that's what they have to work on.
Whether it's for the state or the nation, what worries you out there? That and you couldn't have predicted an Arab Spring. We couldn't have predicted a tsunami in Japan. What's your worry? What could make this 2% growth, modest job growth? We said maybe we might create close to 2 million jobs next year nationally, about 150,000 per month. What could force those numbers down?
The European Union and what happens there is still a great worry. Whether or not China is going to continue to buy our indebtedness is another worry. But a more systemic, a deep-seated problem that worries me about Europe as well, and that is in dealing with these problems of not being able to afford everything we want, instead of cutting back, instead of reducing, for example, government spending, the other option is to increase taxes. And that's simply going to stifle the economy. It's going to stifle job creation for our sons and daughters, our grandchildren. They're not going to have the kind of opportunities we had to buy homes and to raise a family. And that worries me significantly. Can we make that tough choice that it's not going to be at the hands of the 1%. It's going to be because we make the decisions that will ultimately lead to job creation rather than continued lethargic, weak growth, and possibly even negative growth.
I see.
Well said. Jim said everything. The only thing I want to add to it is lack of understanding on part of our politicians what's needed for the country. Unfortunately, if you look at, when we look at our politicians talk and behave, they're too much in ideology, which is good. You have a principle, but at the same time, they forget who they're serving. There are certain things we need in this country, and I think our politicians should realize, whether it's city, state, or national level, what is needed and put the effort there rather than sticking with their own, sometimes, false ideologies.
It's too late and we only have a few seconds to go, but the trillions that we've spent on stimulus, should we have spent more of it on Main Street? In other words, more on half of maybe on infrastructure versus we spent most of it on well, I wouldn't say on Wall Street, but most of it, a lot of it shoring up the banks.
That's a good example.
Great
That's
example.
a good example.
We just $800 billion, almost $1 trillion. And what we could have done, we could have invested in bridges and roads and airports, infrastructure, and who would have built them? Unemployed construction workers. It would have been costless.
And that's investment. That's investment for the country. That's investment.
Amazing how you could fritter away $800 billion.
Oh, it can go very fast.
Jim Doty, SE and DV, 34 years putting on the annual economic forecast. So join you next year for it, number 35.
Thanks, Pete.
Bigger
Great
numbers.
to be on. Thanks.
See you next time on the Chapman Business Report. Thank you very much for watching.
Funding for this program was provided by Chapman University.